Go Jackets.
What is going on, everyone, and welcome to WreckTalk. It's game week, guys. It's here. This is the moment we've been waiting for all off season, and I can speak for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. We are thrilled the off season is over. A lot of people really down on Georgia Tech. A lot of people taking the under on the 4.5 win total for this season for Georgia Tech, and we're ready to come out, show what we can do, and prove them wrong. So we're going to preview Louisville and Georgia Tech. Before we get into that, if you want to become a member of the channel, I'm putting out a lot of members-only content. I'm going to be putting out some this week. You get custom emojis in the live chat. There's a lot of cool stuff that comes with that. Click the join button or the link in the description if you want to support the channel. Like, subscribe. There's also a PayPal link and a CashApp link in the description. So let's get into it. First, I want to talk about expectations for these teams because they couldn't be more worlds apart. So we're going to talk about expectations for Louisville, expectations for Georgia Tech. I want to talk about the coaching turnover. What we're going to see in this preview is these teams are oh so similar in what they're turning over between head coaching changes, a lot of transfer portal players, a lot to come out and prove this season. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about roster turnover. We're also going to talk about what both these teams need to do to win Friday. It's going to be Friday at the Bend, 7:30. We're also going to grade each position matchup. So quarterback, wide receiver, running back, offensive line, all the defensive groups. We're going to give basically does Louisville win that matchup? Is it a push? Are they about even? Or does Georgia Tech win each matchup? And then we're going to give a prediction for the game, score prediction, and who's going to win. Obviously, I don't know why I said it that way. Those things are one and the same. So never or leave it direct to say things that are redundant. First, let's talk about the expectations for Louisville this season. Louisville brings in Jeff Brom. They've got their guy, Jeff Brom, very successful quarterback at Louisville. Has been successful other places. He's been a head coach before. He's proven that he knows what he's doing. A lot of people have Louisville as a dark horse ACC championship contender. I think most Louisville fans probably have this as a 9 or 10 win season, just based really on their schedule. The over-under win total is 8.5. Now, we talked about it on the live show tonight, and if you're interested in really getting into the weeds of this, I would check out the last live show I did. It was last night. I think there was like 2 Louisville fans in there saying, no, we have more tempered expectations of 8 wins. But I think if you took a poll and polled 1,000 Louisville fans, they would, the majority of them would take the over, meaning they're going to win 9 games or more. And I've been doing a lot of preparation for this video. I've watched a ton of content on Louisville. Now, there's not a Louisville content creator, but a lot of it was kind of unbiased people that are just running through all their previews that do college football generally. Probably watched 15 or so of those videos. And most of those people had Louisville at 10-2. And I'll just say I don't really see that. I know your schedule is pretty soft, probably one of the easiest Power 5 schedules in the country. But we're going to talk about why I think that's a little bit undue. Now, flipping it around, worlds apart, expectations for Georgia Tech. Now, if you look at expectations from just the media, like college football media, unbiased in general, like I said, I think most people are going to take the under on Georgia Tech. Most people have Georgia Tech at 4-8 or 5-7. Most people don't think Georgia Tech's going to make a bowl. Now, why is that? Well, if you look at Georgia Tech the past 4 or 5 years, we had Jeff Collins worst stint in Georgia Tech history by far. I'm not here to rehash old wounds or anything or trash our old coach, but it was pretty bad. And I don't think people give Brent Key enough credit for what he did in the 8 weeks he was the interim before he was named head coach. If you didn't pay attention to Georgia Tech last year, the second Brent Key took over, this was a different team. I mean, it was as stark night and day. I have never seen a team look that different in 1 week, for better or worse, than Georgia Tech did in between Central Florida and Pitt. Pitt was a ranked opponent. Brent Key went on the road and beat a ranked Pitt and looked very good. Came back home, beat a good Duke team. Then we had a number of unfortunate injuries at the quarterback position. Jeff Sims goes down. Zach Pyron goes down. And we're able to get, at first Zach Pyron ready and then Zach Gibson. We're able to get wins against Virginia Tech and the division champion North Carolina on the road as well. A lot of people saying, well, that's just the interim bump. And maybe that does happen. I'm here to tell you, though, interim bump ain't enough when you're taking over the team in the condition it was in when Brent Key took over. I don't know that there was a more just dumpster fire situation to try and take over and fix than what Brent Key inherited. I mean, we couldn't even get a punt off. So that was the number one thing. So we've kind of talked about at the head coaching already, but let's talk about Louisville staff turnover. I get from everything I can tell, and look, I'm not a Louisville guy. I'm a Georgia Tech homer. All right, so this is not an unbiased take whatsoever. I bleed white and gold, so understand that if you're not a Tech fan and watching this. But hopefully, it can be entertaining. Got to get entertaining these people on the internet. But from everything I can see, Scott Satterfield, it was a mutual agreement. I tend to not agree with that, though. I think it was mutual. Scott Satterfield leaving Louisville in the same way Mark Richt leaving Georgia was mutual, which it wasn't. Georgia really wanted Kirby to come in, and if Mark Richt wouldn't have stepped down, they most likely would have fired him. And I think the same with Scott Satterfield. Now, Louisville people, let me know if I'm wrong with that, but you wanted Jeff Brom before you hired Satterfield. I would think you probably pushed Satterfield out. He goes to Cincinnati. Scott Satterfield, let's see, got 2 bowl wins for you. He looks like 25-24 at Louisville, 76-48 all time. So he was a decent coach for you. Definitely didn't live up to the expectation of Louisville fans. But you bring in Jeff Brom from Purdue. Now, there's some nice – obviously, you're as happy about getting Jeff Brom as probably a lot of Tech fans are about getting Brent Key. Jeff Brom was a very successful quarterback for you guys. He did play in the league, though I didn't see that he had, a ton of success in the NFL. He's a protege of Bobby Petrino. And look, for all the horrible things I have to say about ethically and personally with Bobby Petrino, he's one of the best offensive minds in probably the history of college football. And particularly, he's great at developing quarterbacks. So it is nice to get someone who comes out of that experience and kind of that tree of Bobby Petrino, even though he did kind of piss down your necks a few times. Bobby Petrino did, as far as Louisville is concerned. Jeff Brom is 66-44 all time. His first stint as a head coach was at Western Kentucky, if you can remember that. He took over after Bobby Petrino. And look, the guy went on a tear at Western Kentucky. He was 30-10 with 2 conference titles and 2 bowl wins. He then goes to Purdue. Now, to be fair, looking at the numbers for him at Purdue, I understand he was taking over a Purdue team that wasn't that great. It looks like he's 36-34, so he's just barely above 500. Though his last 3 years were pretty good. 21, he goes 9-4. 2020, he was 2-4, and then last year he was 8-5. 2 bowl wins in 6 years. Now, one of the nice things about him coming out of Purdue is your quarterback, Jack Plummer, played under his system at Purdue, so he's going to be familiar coming in with that. But I'll say this, like, to just think that you're going to do well on coaching alone or head coach's name alone, like I said on the live show last night, that just seems a lot like Miami last year, and it didn't work out for Miami. And I think Miami's a more talented team than Louisville. So it's going to be interesting to see, how that turns out. Now, who does Louisville have coming in? You wipe the entire staff. Lance Taylor, you're only there for a year. You had the 74th ranked offense. That's where you need to make improvement this season. Defense, like Georgia Tech, was the cornerstone of Louisville last year, so you're probably not heartbroken you're losing him. You're definitely better with Jeff Brom offensively than you were last year. You bring in Brian Brom, and yes, that is Jeff Brom's brother, also a very successful Louisville quarterback. He's a Louisville guy, but he is a first-year offensive coordinator. He was the quarterback coach at Western Kentucky for his brother, Jeff Brom, and was the co-OC and quarterback coach at Purdue. So this is a very natural next step for him. But, hey, we got to see what he's going to do at OC. That remains to be seen. Now, Brian Brown, your defensive coordinator, he was there for 4 years. You had the 11th ranked defense last year. You absolutely were studs on defense last year, one of the best defenses in the country. Now, Brian Brown follows Scott Satterfield to Cincinnati. And I do think you're worse on defense for that. You're bringing in a new scheme. This guy really had your defense going last year. Now, to be fair, in the past 3 years, you were 77th, 49th, and then 30th in defense. So it was trending up. So it looks like he was getting his system in and really getting things going, getting his players in. That's one of the big things for me as far as what will Louisville be this year. I do know your schedule's easy. But like I said, I think you're going to be worse on defense losing Brian Brown. Now, you do bring in Mark Hogan and Ron English from Purdue. But you don't have a true defensive coordinator. You have two co-defensive coordinators in the guys I just mentioned. You were never better than 34th, or they were never better than 34th total defense at Purdue. And we're often worse than that, 70, somewhere around 74 or 80. So I do think you take a step back on defense this year. And I honestly don't like kind of defensive coordinator by committee. You have one that's kind of the defensive coordinator of linebackers and your defensive line, and then the other is the defensive coordinator of the secondary. I think you need one voice, one true leader of that defensive group. Maybe that's kind of how it works, where one guy kind of outranks the other. I don't know, but I don't like that approach to coordinators on defense. Now, let's talk about the staff turnover at Georgia Tech. Obviously, Jeff Collins is out. What was he, 10-28 at Georgia Tech? Like we've said, the worst stint in Georgia Tech history. I mean, we did good, just not to turn the ball over offensively. On special teams, we did well, just not to get a punt blocked. If you remember, toward the first 4 games of last season, we averaged a blocked punt a game. We had 2 punts blocked against Clemson. I can't really imagine us being any worse than we were under Jeff Collins. Now we bring in Brent Key first as the interim. In 8 weeks, he goes 4-4. He gets wins over Pitt, Duke, Virginia Tech, and UNC, and losses to Virginia, Miami, Florida State, and UGA. Obviously, Brent Key played at Georgia Tech, but if you're not a Tech guy, Brent Key played, and maybe Jeff Brom did too. I don't know. I'm not a Louisville guy. Brent Key played at really the golden era, no color, pun intended there, of Tech football under Joe Hamilton and George Gottsie. 2 of the best quarterbacks we've ever had, 2 of the best offensive schemes we ever had, and one of the best coaches we ever had in George O'Leary. In fact, one of the years, it might have been Brent Key's junior year, we had a number 1 ranked offense in the country and near that in rushing offense. Now, Brent Key started his coaching career really under George O'Leary at Central Florida, and you don't have a Central Florida in the state. It's in one of the best Group of 5 schools, soon to be a Big 12 school, without the groundwork that Brent Key and George O'Leary laid there. You don't have Scott Frost coming in with their kind of quote-unquote fake national title, beating Auburn, without, like I said, Brent Key and George O'Leary. Now, Brent Key did have about every job you can have as an assistant, from offensive line coach, like tight ends coach, running backs coach, run game coordinator, offensive coordinator, really anything you'd want to do on the offensive side of the ball. And he does have 2 national championship rings under Nick Saban. In the 3 years he was at Alabama, he was one of the premier assistant recruiters in the country. And ask any Alabama fan, those are some of the best offensive lines that they've ever had. So a lot of people will criticize Brent Key, look how poor the offensive line play was while he was the offensive line coach at Tech. Really hard to judge any player and honestly any coach under a head coach, Jeff Collins, team. I do think that relationship soured. That's why kind of Jeff Collins has made the comments he has. I think Brent Key was more and more vocal toward the end of Jeff Collins' tenure that this is complete insanity and we got to do, something different. Now, we also get rid of offensive coordinator Chip Long. He was only here for a year. We paid a pretty penny to get rid of him. What was it, $750,000, something in that neighborhood. And, Brent Key and Chip Long had been on other staffs before, but it's clear Brent Key was just not confident with him calling plays at Georgia Tech. In fact, toward the end of last year, I think starting at the Miami game on, Chris Winkie was actually calling plays. We kind of completely neutered Chip Long and removed him from his role before we even fired him. Now, we do bring in Buster Faulkner from UGA. He was an assistant coach. He was not an on-field coach, but is credited by Stetson Bennett and most people at UGA for really developing him into what he is. He has been an offensive coordinator before, however. He was offensive coordinator at schools like Middle Tennessee State, Arkansas State, after Gus Malzahn left, and also has 2 national championship rings, has seen the heights of success in college football. So you ask any Georgia Tech fan, including me, pretty excited to have Buster Faulkner at the helm of the offense. Now let's talk about roster turnover, because there's a ton of it for both teams. Biggest loss for Louisville, obviously Malik Cunningham. And I looked at Malik Cunningham's stats, and they honestly look like video game numbers. He threw for 9,660 yards at Louisville, 70 touchdowns to 29 interceptions, ran for 1,568 yards, and I'm sorry, that was just in 2022. Last year he threw for 1,568 yards, 8 touchdowns on 5 interceptions, so he kind of took a step back. Rushed for 3,179 yards. And 50 touchdowns. Like, that's just unreal. Now, you lose, looks like defensive lineman Caleb Banks, your best, probably, you tell me, Louisville fans, your best defensive player, and Yaya Diaby, I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that right. Both linebackers, Yasir Abdullah and Monty Montgomery. If your last name's Montgomery, why would you name your kid Monty? Don't you remember how mean kids were when you were in school? Come on. You lose cornerback Catrell Clark, 6 wide receivers, 3 to graduation, 3 to the portal. You lose 5 tight ends. A ton of things you lose, but you have one of the better transfer classes. You had a top 15 transfer class no matter where you're looking. The biggest get is you bring in Jack Plummer. This guy is a battle-tested quarterback that has shown he is a well above average quarterback. And last year he threw for 3,095 yards, 21 touchdowns on 9 interceptions. So he's completing 62.5% of his passes. You bring in Storm Duck from UNC, and Marcus Washington from UGA, both top 10 cornerbacks in their class, though. We talked about it on the live show. You're going to have a tough time convincing me bringing in any defender from UNC necessarily makes you better. I mean, what was UNC ranked in defense last year? Like 130th, something like that. You bring in Marquise Groves from Texas A&M at cornerback as well. You bring in Stephen Herron from Stanford, so you do get an edge rusher from Stanford. And in my opinion, it's either him or the quarterback in your latest recruiting class. Adenoja Green, absolute stud on the defensive line. Though it is kind of a lot to ask a true freshman to come in and really make an impact. But the easiest position to do that is probably defensive line. So that's just a few. You do bring in a lot of kids. Now at wide receiver, the biggest name is you bring in Jim Callaway from Tennessee. He was a 4-star high school recruit. You bring in a kid from Jackson State or Jacksonville State and Georgia State. Now, I've made fun of this before. Oh, this kid was a top 10, receiver in the country or something. Neat, that's nice. The point being, you're worse at wide receiver this year, I think, than you were last year. Just because none of these kids have played together before. You've kind of mixed and matched kids coming in. Though, Jack Plummer is a really good quarterback. You have no 4-stars in your high school class. For me, biggest question mark on your team is wide receiver at the moment. How are they going to mesh? Because not only have they not played together, they haven't played in this system together. So even though your quarterback has, these receivers haven't. It's going to take time to really get used to that and develop in that system. You bring in several kids at tight end, I believe. I think you bring in some people on offensive line as well. The other big question mark for this Louisville team for me is at linebacker. I think that's probably – it's either that or wide receiver is your weakest position, probably running back. I don't see you really bringing in anyone to replace these two guys that were major contributors at linebacker last year, which is similar to Georgia Tech. We lose Keon White at pass rusher. We lose two great linebackers. We'll talk about that. So what does Georgia Tech lose? Well, Georgia Tech loses Jeff Sims, Hassan Hall at running back, E.J. Jenkins at wide receiver, Malachi Carter. Nate McCullum obviously transfers to UNC. Pierce Quick retired from football. That's a huge loss, along with Viapulu on the offensive line. Offensive line is probably where Georgia Tech is the weakest this year. In the position group, I am least confident in what they're going to do this season. On the defensive side of the ball, absolute killer. 3 names. Keon White went in the second round last year, and Ace Ely and Charlie Thomas. Those are our 3 leading tacklers we lose last year. Also, an up-and-coming Akilo Stone transfers to Ole Miss. Zamari Walton transfers to Ole Miss as well. We need to give them some payback. But we lose our top 3, basically our top 2 rushers. We lose our top 3 wide receivers, and we lose our top 3 tacklers on defense. So what are we doing to replace that? Because that's absolutely killer. Well, on the offensive side of the ball, biggest talk of the town right now is Haynes King. We bring him from Texas A&M. Chase Lane, wide receiver from Texas A&M, and also Andre White, linebacker from Texas A&M. Braylon Oliver, linebacker from Minnesota. And bring in a lot at wide receiver. Dominique Blaylock, Christian Leary. We bring in Abdullah Janae. Christian Leary, a guy that's a 10, 500-meter track star. We'll see if he can develop, route running and really making those tough catches this year. And if you're a Louisville fan, we bring in Travion Cooley from you, and we also bring in Edenoza Rubin from Clemson. There's some others there. Those are the ones that stick out. So let's talk about what do these teams need to do to win. We talked about it on the live show last night. Number one, I think, we have a quarterback in Haynes King that, has yet to proven or to prove himself as really game ready and, an ability to play with consistency at the quarterback position. threw like 7 touchdowns on 6 interceptions last year. So the biggest thing, one, we got to play well at quarterback for Georgia Tech. We need, basically, in my opinion, him not to do too much. We're also installing a new offense. Both of these offenses are going to be trying to find their identity. So I don't think that Haynes King needs to force it. He needs to play within himself and not feel like to win this game he needs to throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. He doesn't. Now, Georgia Tech obviously needs to play physical. I think that's going to be the biggest change in this Georgia Tech team this year. That's probably going to take people by surprise. I think we are going to get some push up front, even though I did say, offensive line is the position I'm kind of least confident in. But offensively, we really got to find ourselves in this game. We have to prevent mistakes can't lead to turnover on offense. I think we need to establish the run. Travion Cooley and Dante White need to be the feature of this game to open up the studs we do have at wide receiver. And I do think we're better at wide receiver than Louisville. We'll talk about it. The kids we're bringing in, I think, are going to be bigger contributors. The biggest thing I think this game is going to come down to is special teams. Georgia Tech has been absolutely atrocious, so you can't allow Louisville to flip field on you in punt coverage. You definitely can't let them take a kick or a punt back. If that happens, I think it's very unlikely that Georgia Tech wins this game. Now, I think you also have to gain some advantage while your offense is developing and finding itself quarter by quarter in this game. You need to flip field yourself. I do think we have some kids that have the ability to do that. I think with the introduction of Ricky Brumfeld, the first special teams coordinator we've had in 4 or 5 years, is definitely going to have a lot of that cleaned up, and our punt coverage is going to be a lot better. Now, what does Louisville need to do to win this game? And some of this is going to sound counterintuitive, because I know that Jeff Brom is a pass-oriented type coach. He likes to throw first. I don't think that's how you win this game, though. I do think you're worse at wide receiver. You're going to be looking to find chemistry between Jack Plummer and these wide receivers. You've kind of been switching things around on offensive line like Tech has. I think that Louisville themselves need to establish the run. The position that you're more consistent at, meaning people that played and contributed last year, is at running back. You do have 2 very, very good running backs. Obviously, there's a reason that Travion Cooley, transferred to Georgia Tech, because these 2 guys beat him out. So I think you need to establish the run. And I think you need it to, in the passing game, run quick passing routes. Slant, flat patterns, curl flats, drags, crossing routes. You need to get the ball out quick, because I think the defensive plan for Georgia Tech is going to be to get in the face of Jack Plummer, never let this guy who does have experience at quarterback get comfortable, and not allowing him to find chemistry within this game with his wide receivers. So I think you're going to have to get the ball out quick. If Louisville tries to throw downfield, or that's the kind of their go-to, that's what they want to do to establish first, Georgia Tech is absolutely stacked at secondary. Between LaMiles Brooks, Clayton Powell-Lee, there's not a kid on our secondary that's not a 4-star and that hasn't balled out in the past. Like LaMiles Brooks is going to be, I think, an early round pick next year. I think Georgia Tech has one of the better secondaries in the country. So if Louisville's game plan is to throw downfield a lot, I think that's very, very good for Georgia Tech. And for Louisville, if you can win the special teams battle, I think you win this football game. So let's go into grading position groups. I want to start with the defensive line. So who's better at defensive line? Louisville fans will probably disagree with me. We do have a lot coming back at defensive line, even though we do lose our key pass rusher in Keon White. I think that's a push. I think we're about equal on the defensive line. At linebacker, I think Georgia Tech's better at linebacker between Trinelius Tatum, Paul Mola, Braylon Oliver, Andre White. I think we're better at linebacker. Secondary, as much as I hate to say this, I'm going to give that as a push too. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that most of what you're bringing in the transfer class, as far as defense is concerned, are supposedly stud secondary players. I'll give it a push there. At quarterback, obviously I think Louisville's better at quarterback. You have a quarterback in Jack Plummer that has proven that he can win games, proven he can win big games. That's something that Haynes King has not been able to prove or demonstrate yet. At running back, I got to give that to Louisville too. As good and as deep as I think Georgia Tech's running back room is compared to the past, you do, again, have two running backs that are very, very good and have proven their ability, to make big plays. And the most consistent position group on your offense. At wide receiver, Louisville fans might laugh at me. I think Georgia Tech has a better wide receiver room. I've already said that earlier in the video. We're going to find out Friday, though. Offensive line, I'll give it to Louisville. You return 8. And like I've said, I'm not too confident in Georgia Tech's offensive line, so I'll give that one to Louisville. And special teams, there's no way I can say Georgia Tech wins the special teams battle with how bad we've been in the past. So I'll give the edge to Louisville as well. Now, big question is who's going to win this game? Obviously, I'm a Georgia Tech homer, so I'm inclined to say Georgia Tech wins. I will say that this game means a lot more to Georgia Tech, or it benefits. Georgia Tech winning this game benefits Georgia Tech far more than it does Louisville. So what do I mean by that? Well, make no mistake about it, even though Brent Key is a first-year head coach, there's no way we would fire him in his first year. He's still coaching for his job. There's a lot that Brent Key needs to prove as a first-year head coach with conference realignment and where Georgia Tech's been for recruiting. Georgia Tech absolutely needs to win this game. I think this is the most important game on Georgia Tech's schedule. Why are people messaging me so much? This is absolutely ridiculous. Sorry, I thought I had that on silent. But I do think this is the most important game on Georgia Tech's schedule this year. And I know a lot of people are high on Jeff Brom, okay? But when you talk about Louisville's ability to be successful this year, I don't hear as much about the skill on your roster as I do your schedule and Jeff Brom. And I don't think that's what you need to be leaning into. I think what you lost last year in the portal and what you bring in, I don't think you replace what you lost at wide receiver, or it's not clear to me. I think you're worse on defense and maybe considerably worse on defense. I do know that, you bring in some studs in the portal. Kudos for your portal class, but you got a new scheme, 2 co-defensive coordinators that haven't proven that they're all that great. You're losing a really good defensive coordinator who had a scheme that fit basically being successful on defense. They were top 11 last year. I think Georgia Tech's secondary is stacked. I think our wide receiver room is better. And I do think we'll get in groove offensively a little bit faster, or maybe we're a little more effective on offense. As crazy as that sounds and what Louisville is able to be. Like I said, I think it's going to come down as any game where two teams are relatively even. It's going to come down to special teams and turnovers. Whoever is able to win those battles is going to win this game. Now, there's an 8.5. Basically, Vegas is giving Louisville 8.5 points. I do think that's ridiculous. I think this is going to be far closer than a 2-score game. I think this is going to come down to a field goal relatively late. I've even seen score predictions that basically have Louisville blowing us out. Maybe I like Crow. I think there's Louisville's not blowing us out. Okay, that's not going to happen. I'm not saying Louisville won't win this game or can't, but I don't think it'll be in blowout fashion. I do think Georgia Tech wins this game and starts off the year with a big win. It is a neutral site game, but it's basically a home game for Georgia Tech. It's not clear to me how well Louisville will travel. I imagine they'll travel relatively well with the hype they have around their program. But there's a lot of hype around the Georgia Tech program this year too. I think it's going to be loud in the Jackets' favor. I think we'll get a final score of around 24-17. So the over-under is 49.5. Take the under on that all day. I don't see two offenses that are still trying to kind of find themselves with new schemes, new coordinators, scoring, a ton of points. But with that being said, guys, let me know what you think. If you're a Louisville fan, where am I wrong? If you're kind of neutral, what do you guys think? Is this going to be a game decided by more than 2 scores? What do you think decides the game? Let me know in the comments below. I try and read most of them, even if I can't comment on every one. And like I said, guys, it's game week. Let's go.